Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's DevOps program, brought to you by Techstrong and Palo Alto Networks. My name is Cody J. Brown, the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting program ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session. If you have any questions, and we really hope that you do, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of the screen. We'll try to address as many questions as we can, and we do have some time set aside toward the end of the program, so do feel free to send those in as soon as you've got them. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of today's program. So our topic is top tactics to address cloud security and cost concerns. And I'm joined by Bar Schwartz, product line manager at Prisma Cloud, and Mike Rothman, chief strategy officer of Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Bar, Mike, thank you both so much for joining us today. Mike, do you want to get us kicked off?
I do. Thank you, Cody. Welcome to everybody who is here today joining Bar and myself for our top tactics to address cloud security and cost concerns webinar. Just to give some background and some perspective in terms of why we're here, what we're doing, where we're going to gather and pull our data and perspective from. We at Techstrong Research have partnered up with our friends at Palo Alto and specifically their Prisma Cloud group to do a couple of different surveys, right? So the one that we're going to talk about initially was really about trying to understand where your cost concern or your cloud concerns were. Again, how many folks are doing, hybrid cloud only, what are some of the issues constraining you? What kind of workloads are you putting up there and the criticality of those? So we'll go through that data up front and give you a sense of where folks' heads are at. And then we're going to dig into two different areas that I think are pretty important, right? First is security. How is it that we're going to, think about the risks of security? Where are the vulnerabilities, especially as we move more towards cloud native types of environments, as well as cost. Always an issue, especially in this kind of macroeconomic type of environment. So we'll spend a bunch of time talking about costs as well. I may have actually stolen my own thunder there by going through the agenda before we even got to it on that. But before, Bar, how are you this morning, my friend? Good to see you.
Good. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you. And security, cloud security is very close to my heart. So very happy to be here today and share with everyone, our thoughts, our vision.
That's right, and your experience, right? And I think a lot of that is going to be relying on both of us. I, as head of Techstrong Research, have spent really the last 12, 13 years in cloud in some way, shape, or form. So it was pretty early from that perspective. I've benefited from seeing the whole rise there. Bar, I'm sure you've been in the space for quite a number of years as well.
Right.
Be able to rely on that experience also.
Yeah, from both like the startup worlds and doing like very specific things in the cloud security world, and now in this big Palo Alto Networks, obviously. So yeah, definitely.
Good. So without further ado, let's jump into the data. So the first question that we asked was, how would you describe your organization's approach to cloud computing? We had a couple of different options, right? One first was multi-cloud and hybrid, use a variety of cloud and on-prem platforms. We had cloud first, which is cloud is a priority whenever it makes sense. You have cloud only. So those are basically born in the cloud companies that are exclusively having their workloads in the cloud. And we also had an option for no cloud, although it was really a survey about cloud stuff. So if somebody kind of came in and did no cloud, I guess they were just looking for the gift card or whatever, get into the, into the drawing for the gift card. But that was obviously a very small percentage of our respondents, as you would expect, right? Almost 60% of the respondents were in some kind of hybrid and or multi-cloud type situation, 24% being cloud first, 17% being cloud only. So again, I think that is kind of what I expected, right? Bar, any surprises there from the data that you see?
No, like we see the journey to the cloud, right? So we can expect the majority to be somewhere in the hybrid, obviously multi-cloud. And I think that over time we'll see more and more going into the cloud first, cloud only also. But yeah, cloud first obviously is going to take a much bigger part here.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I would concur with that. Yeah, it's hard for me to find folks nowadays that are like, well, I'm only in one cloud, right? Or they're either having to worry about getting back to their data sources that still remain on-prem. So then we've got some transit networking issues. We have obviously some security and threat detection issues because that's obviously a huge point of vulnerability when you're dealing with hybrid type environments. You certainly are going to have more companies started, and nobody's going to start up a company today and go, oh gosh, let's, kind of buy a whole bunch of colo space and build out our own, data center, right? I mean, obviously the path of least resistance and most cost efficient way of getting something up and running, whether it's a new workload for an existing company, whether it's a new company that are starting, with their initial workloads, a lot of it looks like cloud. So this data was pretty self-explanatory. But then what we did with the survey is we kind of broke it up, right? We asked the folks that were cloud only or cloud first to rank their concerns. And the four options were security, cost, change management, and that's really aversion to change. So, folks that had a hard time either operating or they didn't want to move towards more and different operational motions in the cloud. And then we had limited cloud skills. So, and I can't say I'm really surprised by this data either, right? Security with, God, my eyes are not so great anymore, close to 80% either having it ranked first or second in terms of their big risk. Cost, similarly, 70, almost a little bit over 70%, basically saying that was my first, one or two concern. Right. So and I think that's pretty consistent with what I've seen over the years in that folks are, worried about protecting the data that's going to these workloads as they've done cloud for a little while and they've gotten a couple of bills where you're starting to scratch your head. You're like, oh, I got to start thinking about the costs here. So that wasn't surprising. And obviously that's why we oriented the rest of the event around security and cost. Go ahead, Bar.
Right. No, just because we're going to be very focused on security and cost today, right? Maybe one word on this, other two things, or the limited cloud skills. When we say cloud, a cloud is very big and different cloud providers are built differently. So definitely limited cloud skills and have the right people. And even if you have the AWS expert, it doesn't really mean that you also have those Azure and GCP and other cloud services experts. So definitely like valid concern here as well. But yeah, obviously no surprises here.
No surprise. And I'll echo that because I've been teaching cloud security for the past, 12 years. And we have a course that is specific to AWS. We have a course that's specific to Azure in terms of at least the labs, right? The lectures are the same. On that front, and they're different platforms, right? How you have to think about things like identity management, how you have to think about things like networking, and think about some of the other services that you use, whether they're load balancers or threat detection or logging and monitoring. All of these things are different on these different cloud platforms. So that was a little bit of a surprise to me, but again, I guess if you kind of think about it, folks are really worried about the integrity of their data as they're moving it to the cloud. Obviously, they're worried about cost. So I mean, I guess from that backdrop, it's not surprising. And we did ask folks to rank things. If we would have said, hey, is this a concern? I would guess that all four of those would be pretty high. Or at least, in terms of a percentage basis, would be considered, concerning for a lot of the respondents to the data. So again, that's interesting from that perspective. And then we also asked the folks that were in hybrid or multi-cloud, what are reasons preventing you from having a cloud only or cloud first approach? Shockingly enough, security concerns and costs were two of the top three. Right. So again, security still an issue. Again, if these folks are in hybrid, again, you're doing cloud. And I think that's one of the main messages here, right? You're already doing cloud. If you know about it, that's great. If you're on top of it, that's perfect. If you've got controls and architecture and doing a number of things, even better from that standpoint. But the reality is, we've you're there, right? So the idea that you're going to hold back because of security concerns, I don't think is all that realistic. But I do want to hit on that little purple bar, right? Some workloads cannot move to the cloud. And that could be for a lot of different reasons, right? We see a lot of different environments where there's a data security or provenance issue, right? Where it has to be in a controlled environment. Any kind of government or kind of high security, possibly military type of environment, sometimes they can't use clouds. Sometimes you have old applications, right, that you just don't make any sense to change and refactor and think about kind of moving to the cloud. So when you think about that 58% that said they were hybrid and multi-cloud, is that going to come down for folks to go more cloud only and cloud first? I don't know, right? I mean, I think a lot, especially for bigger companies, a lot of the workloads that they have to deal with, right? A lot of the applications, they're not going away, right? They're not changing they're kind of the whole legacy thing. And does it really make sense to, move those legacy applications is still very much a discussion in a lot of the companies that we're working with. Are you seeing anything different,
Right.
Bob, in terms of those workloads?
Not really, but maybe one more thing about this, right? Like, I guess that if we were asking the exact same question 5-7 years ago, this purple one of workloads cannot move to the cloud were much, much higher. And I think that over time, both there is an understanding that maybe things that we didn't think that can move to the cloud basically can, or some improvement that were in the cloud. So you mentioned Gov, right? We have Cloud Gov today. We have specific tenants for Gov things in all major cloud providers. So we do see more and more initiatives that helping you move things that you didn't think before that will go to the cloud. And now you do have the opportunity to do this. So I can expect that if we will do the same webinar in 5 years, we'll see this purple line going a little bit down, and the understanding that there are some, and with some improvements also, there are some things that you didn't think before but can move to the cloud at the end.
Yeah, no, Bar, that's a great point, right? And I do think, and again, 10 years ago, right, security concerns were way out there, right? And stuff that we couldn't move. And I think, the security concerns will remain paramount because that does, create a little bit of a different attack surface as you move things towards a cloud hosted type of environment. But your point is well taken in that, over time, and we see that, right? COTS type of software, commercial off the shelf, that, kind of just runs in your environment. A lot of those vendors are moving those environments to a SaaS or some type of cloud platform, so you don't have to worry about that. It's really those legacy applications that it makes no sense to invest in moving forward, that you would still have them. And what we tell folks to do is put those in a colo, right? Put a box around them, build a moat as deep as you can on that, and kind of, hope that you don't have big issues on that front, and really focus a lot of your efforts on moving forward in terms of the applications and workloads that are put in there. All right, our next question focused on the criticality of cloud apps, or the business criticality. And this is a little bit interesting in that only 2% said they were not critical or not at all critical. So 98% of the cloud apps that are out there are critical in some way, shape, or form. So to your point from about 10 seconds ago, Bar, folks are doing this, right? They are moving stuff. It is sensitive. It has important data, whether it's customer data, protected data, etc. It's critical to an organization's IT environment. And folks are doing this, right? They're doing it today, and they're not going to stop. And I thought that was, kind of interesting because, it's what we kind of intuitively knew, but it's good to, get everybody's feedback that basically says, yep, we're doing serious stuff in the cloud now, and we are not going to stop. And to wrap up our little data before we dive into security, how concerned are you that your cloud-based applications and data will create a business disruption? Extremely concerned, 15%, very concerned, 38%, somewhat concerned, 32%. So we're moving critical workloads to the cloud, yet there is still that concern, right, that applications and business will be disrupted because of cloud issues, right? Sometimes they're operational issues, sometimes they're security issues, but that concern is there. And again, I think that's consistent with what we saw, right? Security being one of the major concerns there. Some change management issues, obviously some limited cloud skills issues, but this is where we are, right? This is the backdrop for computing today and moving forward, is that we are moving to the cloud. That is happening. That is not going to stop. We are moving significantly important and critical workloads to our business. That's not going to stop either, right? And we're concerned about, kind of disruption. So we've got to start thinking about cloud specific issues, cloud specific vulnerabilities, cloud specific tactics, platforms, and tooling to ensure that we're not putting our critical data, those critical workloads, at undue risk. That was a little bit of a soapbox action, Bar. I don't know. I mean, you have anything to add to that? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, if we take the last two slides, it's not a surprise that security was top there. But I think that our mission here as security vendors, right, is to make sure that you can focus on the business logic. You can focus on having your life easier moving to the cloud, and make those very concerned and extremely concerned a little bit, smaller portion of that. So, this is like our task as security vendors. I will talk later on about the specific security vulnerabilities here and things that we see in the cloud. But yeah, like take those and then work with your vendors to make sure that you can actually make those very concerned and extremely concerned much smaller part here.
That's right. That's right. And, to be clear, security folks tend to be a little bit of a paranoid or concerned bunch to begin with, right? So I don't know that we'll ever be able to allay all of the concerns, from a security, perspective. But what we want to do is do our homework, right? We want to understand the risks. We want to understand how things in the cloud are different and how we have to, kind of behave and provision our security environment to a greater degree, which is a great segue to the next section of our little event today. And that's really to dig into, some of the new vulnerabilities, maybe not new, but different, kind of issues that we deal with in the cloud. And just to get a backdrop, we've got, and one of the things you'll get as a follow-up for being here in the event is that we're going to give you a report called Top 5 Issues, for app dev in the cloud. It's really a cloud security thing. So we'll take the next two slides largely from that report. So there's a lot more detail behind those things. But again, let's just kind of go through them, Bar, right? Application vulnerabilities, infrastructure misconfigurations, malware, right? Not going away even though we go into the cloud, over-provisioned access, and insecure APIs being, again, things that we have to start thinking about as we move these workloads to the cloud. So I'll give you free reign, brother. Where do you want to start in terms of how we're going to unpack, these issues?
Yeah, I want, first of all, like a general statement here. I think that, as you mentioned, like most of the things that we see here are not new, right? Like we've heard about over-provisioning access a long time ago. We know about insecure APIs. Malware, obviously, it's not something new that burned with the cloud, right? So I think that there are no like new big things here, but in the cloud, those are changing and becoming a little bit more a challenge to our security teams. Let's take as an example, and we can talk about each other, each and every one here, but let's start with malware here, right? Because malware, if you look at it, it seems like, all right, I know malware. Malwares are not like new. We had those things like even before when we use like, some vulnerable applications running on our machines, whether it's in the cloud or not in the cloud, right? So malware is not new, but if you look at the cloud infrastructure and even you look at the other things that you have here, like over provisioning access and insecure API and application vulnerabilities, right? All of those making malwares in the cloud act a little bit differently and try to, take advantage of the cloud infrastructure. So I want to give one example here about what we see around malware. So we see what we call cryptojacking, right? So it's running like crypto mining services on your machines, right? You're like an attacker that is able to get
cloud
into your
hosted
machine.
machines, Bar.
Right, cloud
machines
hosted
you have
machines.
hosted in the cloud. That's right.
And one very interesting thing that we've seen is that because of the configuration specifically to the cloud of what we called auto scaling, so wherever you are using like your CPU and RAM very high, automatically you are going to populate more and more machines to support the workload. In this very specific example of crypto mining, we've seen one of the customers that have seen this crypto mining, and then automatically more and more machines were populated to support this very big workload of crypto mining, right? And then at the end, we just ended up with, or this customer ended up with a lot of different machines running this crypto mining. And obviously it costs a lot to the customer and was a very big problem. So malware are not new. And it's just the cloud infrastructure and the other things like insecure API and over provisioning access is an example that supporting this, the spread of the malware and the different infrastructure here. So this is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. And what I want to hone in on is over provisioned access, right? And kind of piggybacking on kind of your talk about malware, Bar. What we see, whether it's application vulnerabilities, infrastructure misconfigurations, or specifically over provisioned access, all of those can be symptoms of malware, right? So when you're sitting there trying to figure out how to detect some of these attacks as they're happening, and again, regardless of whether it's an admin that doesn't know what they're doing, right? And that can be an infrastructure misconfiguration, whether it's a developer that maybe, put a defect or didn't, kind of scan or something from that, and that results in the application vulnerabilities, or not understanding how identity and access works in the cloud, right? Which would provide a situation where you have, over provisioned access. All of those are opportunities that you have to detect misuse or some other type of attack in your cloud environment. And I really want to hone in on over provisioned access and really identity and access management, to a great degree, because as you move to the cloud, if there's one thing I can point out and say, this is what's kind of fundamentally different about a cloud platform, is that identity and access management is paramount, right? It's critical. It is the major foundation of how you decide who can do what in your cloud. Any resource that you have running on a cloud platform has some type of resource locator number, and that means you can apply a policy or an entitlement to that resource specifically. So the idea that you've got, maybe millions of resources with possibly varying entitlements on there means that you have to really understand how to think about the cloud within the context of least privilege, or else it's going to be a big problem, right? Because you just make one error and you open up your entire environment, to malicious use. And it could be internal, it could be external, right? Admins could be doing something, and again, we've got to protect against both of these, kind of attack vectors as we move these workloads, into the cloud.
Right. And maybe one thing about over provisioned access, and just for full disclosure, I lead the cloud identity security part in Prisma Cloud. And so there's like,
so you may know a thing or two about this.
Yeah, I would say, and one of the main things that we see here, and again, if we think about identities 10 years ago, there was very different identities, because now we see more and more non-human identities, right? So if we had to protect humans and their access to the organization resources, now we need to think about all of those virtual machines running in the cloud, containers running in the cloud, functions, just piece of code, right? Like we see the identities being very, very different. And I didn't even mention everything about like IoT devices and all of those other things that we need to have access to those as well. Now, the main problem that we see here, as you mentioned, like we have this permissions pool, a lot of different permissions. We see like tens of millions of combinations of permissions for some of our bigger customers. And the main problem here is that many of those permissions are unused. And when we have done the statistics, and I think that this is part of the report, we've seen that like for most, if not all of the identities, they get more permissions that they actually need. And this is a big problem, because if an attacker could get into the user, to the machine, they can do a lot of different stuff which many of those is not even necessary. So this is a very big problem that we see with access. And just to add to this and to my previous point about clouds that are built differently, the IAM mechanism for the different big cloud providers is built very differently. Right. And it's not like, right, so even if you're an expert and you know how to do things in AWS, now doing this identity configurations and policies in other cloud provider, not only technically, but conceptually is very different. So it's definitely add to this, to those challenges.
That's right. That's right. And I think, we're seeing different issues start to manifest over time. Again, if we were having this discussion 5 years ago, infrastructure misconfigurations would be number one on the list, by far, right? Because folks didn't know what they were doing. So they were moving all these things to the cloud. They were configuring them, with open, not just with over provision access, but, kind of without really locking down these environments. That's kind of given away to a degree to application vulnerabilities, as we've seen more DevOps, start to make its way, and these integrated pipelines make its way onto, kind of cloud platforms for deployment and for platforming of the application. We're starting to see issues and really kind of attack vectors through the application side of things, which again may result in infrastructure misconfigurations, may result in over provisioned access as things change. But we're going to constantly see that. And really the fifth thing that we didn't really hit on too much before we, move on to the answers bar, right? Insecure APIs. And when you think about microservices and you think about how a lot of these modern applications are really stitched together, it's all via APIs. So ensuring that you have, whether it's an API gateway or some other type of API monitoring capability to ensure that those APIs aren't being misused, very critical as we move towards these, modern development environments.
I fully agree. Maybe last thing on this slide again in general, I think that your comment about looking at the application itself is really the important thing here, because I think that once we understand it, we look at applications and not just the infrastructure, right? We're not like trying to find misconfiguration only in the infrastructure, but in the part of the infrastructure of the application itself. And then the understanding that application vulnerabilities, those are things that we are able to find maybe very early, what we call shift left, right? So look at you mentioned the DevOps tool, the DevOps, the CI/CD pipelines, or even before that, like during the development part, I think that if we'll be able to find those things very early, even before they're going into our production environment or the cloud environment, that is going to, help us with much less misconfiguration, with much less over provisioning access, vulnerabilities, of course. So yeah, I mean, going left, this is something very important as well that we see here.
Yep, and we will get to that. So what are some of the things we can do in order to address some of these issues? And again, this comes from the top 5 report that everybody will get as a follow-up on this. Starting with number 1, right? Adopt a team mindset. And that's really about involving not just security in the discussion, development, operations. We talked about APIs, identity and access management, kind of, it really becomes a team sport as we move into, kind of cloud land, and making sure that we've got communication and collaboration happening as applications are being developed, as we're ensuring that we have a sense of, the operational motions to address issues that we find, from a security standpoint. All of these things are absolutely critical as we move into, kind of cloud land. So any other comments about the team bar and what you need as you're moving forward with, kind of cloud into, into or security evolving into more of a cloud mindset?
No, I think a team is a key word here, right? I mean, we know that the relationship between developers and the willingness to run fast, to be productive, and the security guys that would like to make sure that everything is secure was always like a challenge, right? And I think that here we see definitely this challenge. So the cloud even take it, the productivity and releasing fast to the cloud and agile to the edge, right? So this thing between those teams is something very important that we need to figure out how to do in the right way.
True, for sure. All right, number two, reduce complexity with a platform approach. So this is the idea that we're actually going to have a tool chain that is integrated, that communicates amongst itself, that it again kind of reduces and normalizes alerts that are coming out of the environment. Because I mean, just think about the number of different cloud providers that a typical organization has, right? 58% are hybrid and multi-cloud, and typically both. Right. So you've got a bunch of different cloud platforms. As we said, each of these cloud platforms works somewhat differently in terms of that environment. We've got hundreds of different PaaS services and third-party types of libraries that come in, and each one of them could have its own, kind of configuration and security environment. It becomes mind-numbing from a complexity standpoint. So one of the ways you can think about reducing that complexity is thinking about things from a platform perspective, from assessment, right, and vulnerability management, all the way through to operations and remediation. I would guess you may have an opinion on the platform view, Bar. It's just a hunch I have. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that we see, and again, when we look at the market and we talk with customers, we see that they try to reduce this complexity. They try to find platforms that are going to give them this flexibility, whenever they would like to choose to start, and whatever they would like to get. But if tomorrow morning there is a new need, because the cloud is flexible, and tomorrow morning now I have new kind of application or new type of thing that I need to protect, I don't want now to start negotiation with a new vendor, try to learn a new tool, have the new onboarding, right? So I think that once you have the platform, you have this flexibility that if you have anything else that you need at some point of time, you can just use it as part of the platform. So yeah, I'm fully with you here.
And the other thing about platforms, especially given that things are changing so quickly, the folks that are building out these platforms continue to fold in new capabilities, continue to both organically and inorganically, right, through acquisitions, add accretive functionality to these platforms. So even the platform decision you're making today, that's not what it's going to look like in 3 or 4 years, because things are constantly changing. So again, vendor selection becomes pretty important there. You don't want somebody that's maybe not on the leadership side of the business, because they may not be able to keep pace with, technology innovation, and really continue to fold in and make sure that the platform adapts to, kind of what's happening out there in the environment. So with that, and obviously there are a handful of vendors, Palo Alto being one of them, that has a pretty comprehensive cloud security platform called Prisma Cloud. So that would certainly be one that should be on your list. Choose cloud native tools and technology. So this is one where, and to me, I interpret this as, try not to do this whole lift and shift thing, right? Where you're taking an existing workload from a data center, you're just kind of lifting it, moving it into the cloud, and you're not refactoring, you're not taking advantage of some of the new networking capabilities, you're not taking advantage of some of the platform services that are available to you. You're basically not leveraging what is at your disposal in terms of being able to provide a more secure platform, right, and foundation for these workloads, for these applications. So really making sure that whatever tools you pick have been built for the cloud becomes absolutely critical. What did I miss on that one, Bar?
Yeah, again, I fully agree. I think that it's not an easy task, right? It seems like, yeah, you should rewrite your application, take advantage of the cloud, and definitely this is the right thing to do. And this should be your vision. This should be the place that you would like to be in. It's definitely not an easy part. And I think that organization needs to put a lot of effort here to investigate and research how exactly they want to have it. They need to have their clear vision here and understanding of where they would like to be, and then do it this way. So yeah, definitely is very important part. And I think that once you're trying and you're doing things which are kind of hybrid, obviously, if we're looking at the security part, right, it may get a little bit more challenging now to understand how do we secure those kind of different environments So yeah, definitely very important point.
That's right. And then we get to really the next one, which in a lot of cases I think is one of the more important ones, yet tends to be an afterthought, and that's how are we going to get this work done, right? And not a lot of people said when they ranked that limited cloud skills was a huge issue, but I can tell you, I talked to these folks, and especially if you're in a multi-cloud environment, and just the differences between what you have in Azure versus what you have in AWS, and the operational and specific motions to fix these things. I can tell you, automation will be your friend, right? If we talk to the DevOps folks, automation is what's driven a lot of those innovations. The idea of even something as simple as a security guardrail that basically says if you change a network construct or a network configuration and it's not authorized, roll that back. Right? If you have somebody that has utilized the root account, shut down that account. Right? There are things that we can do not to impede progress or slow down the environment. That's exactly what we don't want to do, but we still have to provide the security that's required. So again, automation and really figuring out how to leverage what the machines are good at, right? Which is very discrete functions that are extremely predictable and kind of consistent and repeatable. That's where we should think about kind of automation. And I usually tell this story about automation. Go ahead, Bar. Yeah, sorry.
No. So just wanted to mention here two quick things. So one of them is that if we just look at the ratio here, right, between number of developers, number of architects that we have in the organization, and the security engineers, we understand that like there's no way that like with the manual work or things which are not automated, they will be able to handle all of those kind of things. So this one thing. And second thing, I think, we're trying to, I think over time, trying to find more and more use cases for machine learning and AI. I think that cloud and security, those are very good use cases for using AI and machine learning. And automated tools, automated tool can be like a very different kind of tools, but I think that the one who is actually leveraging machine learning and are able to take some decisions for you, analyze a lot of data, and then understand like both from the attack path or things like anomaly detection that we see in the cloud. Those are definitely the things that we would like to see. And I think that automated security is also very important, because when we think about security, visibility is not enough, right? We want to have an actively tool that is going to help you with prevention as well. And if we find something in real time, if we find some anomaly in our cloud account, we would like to block it in real time. So visibility is very important. We want to understand, who can do what are the configurations, what is misconfigured. But we also want that when there is a real attack, someone will be able to block it. So I think that it all goes through an automation here. Automation, I would call it automation and prevention together. And yeah, I think usage of AI and machine learning, this is a very important part of it.
Yeah, you bet. Again, using the resources that are at our disposal, right? And you kind of inferred a little bit on the fifth one, which is gain visibility across all workloads and data. I would maybe order these a little bit differently if I had to, do it again, right? So I think team mindset, that's kind of where we start. That's how we build the foundation. To me, visibility comes next, because if you don't know what's in your cloud environments, you kind of have no idea what it is you should be protecting. So ensuring that you have grand, kind of view over what's happening there is important. I mean, that's a whole thing, right? We have a whole business now called attack surface management, right? I know Palo Alto made an acquisition in that space. We're really trying to understand what is out there that is within our control so that we can really understand where we can be attacked. Right. Coming out of that, I want to choose cloud native tools and technology, because that's how I'm starting to layer security into my environment so I can see it. Then I have the right appropriate tools to do it. I want to organize those tools and aggregate those tools into a platform. And then I want to automate where it makes sense. So from the tips in order to do that, that's the world according to Mike. I don't know, Bar. I don't think you're going to get a lot of argument there. But maybe, I don't know, I guess I should ask the question, right? Any argument here? I think the viewers like conflict, so maybe I should kind of fish around for that a little bit.
No, yeah, and maybe I think that the key word, by the way, for this last one is all, right? Because and this is again from the platform things that we've discussed before, but I think that, like, let's take as an example, if you have like a virtual machine running in the cloud, right, and it has a vulnerability, this is one thing. But if you have this virtual machine with a vulnerability, which also is as an overprivileged role, and is also publicly accessible, right, and it misconfigured in some ways, this is a much bigger risk here. So I think that once you have this visibility for all of your workloads and all of the misconfigurations and identity and whatever it is, and the data, obviously, then this is where you can truly understand what is happening in the cloud and what are the risks that you might have. So being focused only on one part, right? Being focused only on just one part of the story might be not enough for you to understand the actual risk here. So this is, I think that for this one, always is like the main thing here.
That's right. So before we kind of jump off of the security band and start to talk a little bit about costs, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about prioritization, right? Because the reality is you're going to get dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of some types of alerts when you get fully up and running in the cloud, right? How do we make sense of these things? How do we decide what we have to do first and foremost? And we have, again, just kind of 3 different tips here that take for them what you will. First, we'll call fast path alerting. And that's the reality that each cloud platform has their own kind of monitoring and alerting capability. It works in real time. So AWS has CloudTrail into CloudWatch, or EventBridge now they call it, right? Azure has Azure Monitor that allows you to set specific rules. And there, what we're doing is we're looking for what I call no-nos in your environment, right? Stuff that just should not happen using root account, overly provisioned storage accounts or storage buckets, right? Not least privilege or not requiring MFA for admins, just things that, again, you want to know about right away, something that creates potential existential risk to your environment. Again, there's not a lot of this stuff, right? Maybe 10, 12, 15. We want to build those alerts specifically into the cloud platform. We want to have an operational motion specifically around those because they're important enough that I want to get eyes on that within seconds, right? Not even minutes, because they create real risk in your environment. So I'm going to go outside of my typical, monitoring, alerting, centralized SIM or kind of workload or work management type of thing, ServiceNow or Service Desk or one of those different type of tools. And that's not something that a lot of folks think about, right? They're like, oh, we use Splunk, we put everything into Splunk, or we use, again, Palo has a solution, XIM that does that, or XDR, right? We use that to detect all the stuff that's happening in the cloud. Again, one of the things that we recommend is not for everything, right? But for a dozen things, build those alerts specifically into the cloud and have an operational motion around that.
And maybe for the first point here is try to find those things that requires very little effort, but is going to improve your security posture very much. So MFA, I think, is a great example. There's no reason for you not to have MFA enabled. Very easy to implement, and is going to raise your security posture so much. So yeah, I think that those are the things we need to be really focused on, right?
Yep, and looking for. Then we want to continuously monitor our environment, right? And this is, so the term that's used now is Cloud Security Posture Management or CSPM. We want to make sure we're monitoring configurations in our environment. We want to make sure our policies are being met. We want to look for attacks, and we want to do it on a continuous basis. Why? Because things are changing in our cloud. It's a very, very dynamic environment. And by continuous, is it real time? Well, depending on the services, kind of, right? But really, it's every couple of minutes. We want to look for different changes. We want to see what's happening in our environment. We want to make sure that nothing that is unexpected is happening in the situation. So, Brian, that's a big part of what Prisma Cloud does. So, I suspect you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, The thing here is that, as you mentioned, in the cloud, things change really, really fast. And we see some of the attacks that are happening in minutes, right? So you need to make sure that you really have this continuous, and not only continuous, but, and as you mentioned, real time can be like different for different services, because it doesn't make sense for everything to be like real time if you don't need it. But for some specific things, you will need like a real time, both detection capabilities and, as I mentioned before, prevention as well, right? So to be able to find things in real time, to be able to prevent things in real time, this is very important. And obviously we have some traditional tools where we scan for things like every 24 hours or something. It just doesn't work in the cloud. We need to make sure that we are doing it in real time, and you have the visibility, as I mentioned. And of course, you mentioned here risk-based and those kind of things. I think that one of the important here is the application context, right? So when you do this continuous risk-based CSPM is obviously about the cloud resources. But I think that the next step here is to understand also the application context. So is this virtual machine in risk, and what is the actual risk here? The risk is to the virtual machine, or the risk is part of an application that interacting with database as well? And then maybe the risk here is that the risk is to the database and our data. So I think about the application context as well, and not only at the specific resource level. There's another important thing here.
100%. And to wrap things up, when we decide and authorize a remediation and a change, we kind of want to make sure those things happen. And that really hits on kind of a lot of the organizational differences that we have as we move into the cloud, right? What we see with a lot of DevOps applications, what we see with a lot of cloud native type of infrastructure, is that these are different teams. And in a lot of cases, they're not necessarily formally affiliated or associated with central IT. So we want to make sure when we have an issue, especially if it's a security issue, right, we want to make sure that we bring that to a conclusion and that we confirm that conclusion so that the work gets done. Because, again, the reality is folks that are working in an application context may not understand the severity of the security vulnerability or the security fix. So it's not enough to just send the work ticket into ServiceNow, right, and hope that it gets done, right? We want to confirm that with our scanning. We want to confirm that, with our specific alerts or fast path alerts. We just want to make sure that the change actually gets committed and fixed. So those are really the three things to get your arms around prioritization of cloud. So that leaves us a little bit of time to go through costs as well, because again, we know cost is a huge issue for a lot of organizations. Obviously, it was one of the things that we were banging on when we were promoting to get all you folks here on that front. And here again, 4 tips to think about how you're going to really optimize your cloud environment. First being, utilize actually the tools that you have, right? And we talked about that for security, and it is just as applicable for cloud, right? Making sure that you're using things like cloud load balancers as opposed to having to put a dedicated load balancer that you're running on a large instance at all times, right? When we're talking about, again, some of those, specific services that are there on the networking side, to leverage the cloud native DNS. I mean, we don't want to be leveraging our own services for that because we don't need to, right? And we should be embracing things like auto scale. And somebody in the chat put in that, if you have a max number of servers that you have in terms of the auto scale group, that obviously kind of constrains what an attacker can do if they gain control of the auto scale group. And that is absolutely true. So we want to only allow as much scale as we need in that environment, but that allows us to basically decommission or compress our environment as we need to as well. So we can expand it, we can contract it as we need to, and those things don't happen with the environment that we have on-prem. So we do have to do a decent amount of refactoring. Bar, you had mentioned that before. And that's really one of the first things you can do to make your cloud environment a little bit more cost efficient, is actually use the stuff that you have in place there.
Yeah. And Mike, maybe one more thing here is you need to choose also the cloud provider that you want to use. And it is fine to use more than one cloud provider. So if you find that there is a very good service with a very good maybe cost as well of another cloud provider, just really think about using it as well. So you don't have to, even though of course there might be some advantages to use the same cloud provider for the way they're talking with each other or work with each other. But for some specific use cases, it might make sense to use another cloud provider as well for specific services. And it's fine. And this is something that we see with many of our customers, and also in the report, right?
Yeah, you bet. And I think that is one of the key aspects of cloud, is that you can pick your platform based upon the performance characteristics of your cloud environment, right? And we see a lot of analytics applications migrate towards Google Cloud, right? Because that's kind of what they do, right? And for builders who need a lot of capabilities, they tend to go to AWS. Folks that are, again, this is kind of a fairly generic idea, but Azure being, kind of folks that had a lot of .NET apps because it was a lot easier for them to move that. And that's no hard and fast rules on that front. And what we've seen is a lot of folks that have matured their AWS environment move it over to Google due to cost economics. So that's another thing that you could add there too, is platform your cloud environment based upon what's going to be most efficient for the kind of workload it is. We want to optimize the resources you have running already. Right. So some of you decide, oh God, we can do automated snapshots, right? Which is great, right? I mean, you're able to maintain and store the storage and kind of the data that you have in your environment. But a lot of folks forget to clean those up. Right. So you're paying for storage over and over again. Right. Let's say we talk about monitoring. You can have, an infinite amount of collection of the telemetry that you're pulling out of this environment. How many of you actually, are using that from 8, 10, 12, 18 months ago? We could move that off into much cheaper, kind of archive storage where we can get to it if we need to from a forensic standpoint, but we don't have to, utilize that all the time. We talked about auto scaling to expand and contract and optimize, the environments. Another thing, turning resources off during off hours. Now, some of you work in a 24/7, development environment. You have, kind of groups that, may be offshore, and it could be anything, right? Eastern Europe, South America, India, Asia. On that front, you may have your development shop working at all times, so that wouldn't apply. But if you have, a central idea of your developers that are working only during a certain time frame, shut down those resources, right? I mean, that's half the day that you could get by not paying on. And remember, this is all usage. We didn't care about that in our data center because it was just on, right? But now that we're paying per usage, we're paying by the minute, right? Turning off some of that stuff, could be advantageous, right, from a cost standpoint. Third point here, right? Use reserve capacity. And that really means committing to your cloud vendor with a certain amount of spend. Maybe it's, kind of committing to a certain number of instances on the compute side. Maybe it's a certain amount of storage. Maybe it's just an aggregate number. I'm going to spend X amount of dollars or shekels or drachma or whatever, kind of currency, euros, you're dealing with there. That gives you pricing power, not power, but, at least a pricing advantage, right, over, with the cloud provider to really commit to a certain amount of resources to drop your costs down. And finally, back to the first thing we talked about for security, right? It's a team sport. It's a team mindset. And that becomes all the more important when we're dealing with cost, right? We want the developers to think about, how do we optimize this? Can we use a containered environment or containerized environment? Can we use a serverless type of function that doesn't require the infrastructure to be up and running? So having the developers really cognizant of cost metrics, getting them the reports to help them understand that I turn this thing on and my costs went through the roof, and that was problematic. Same thing goes for security, by the way, right? If you're going to use some of the cloud native security things, you want to model those costs in place to ensure that you're not again, squandering resources or taking advantage of resources from that standpoint. So don't want to think this is an afterthought, right? Because cost is central to everything that we're doing. But if you think about it from build it, kind of with the cloud in mind, optimize the stuff you already have there, commit to a certain dollar, spend amount or currency spend amount with your cloud provider, and get the developers and the ops folks to really think about costs as they're designing and architecting the systems. I think those are, kind of good ways that you can, try to keep costs under control, right? I don't know that it's something that we can, think that we're going to reduce costs month over month, but we do want to make sure that our costs are both predictable as well as manageable from that standpoint. So Bar, I know cost isn't really your thing. You're more of a security person. Did I miss anything from the discussions, you've had with customers, or want to add anything else?
No, I don't think you miss. But really, when you look at, it's different than, you previously, bought your own server, and now you have this server, and this is what it is. Here, the flexibility of the cloud allowing you, as you mentioned, you need storage. All right, there are some tiers to storage. There are storage that you need immediately, but there are storage that you might archive and you can get like in 24 hours. So think about, the same goes obviously for machines with all of the different things like reserve capacity and spot instances and those kind of things. Yeah, just take advantage of those kind of things, understand what is the use case, and then based on that, choose whatever makes more sense in the cloud. Not all storage created equally, not all machines created equally. Try to think about the actual use case, and then you can definitely have some fine tuning here for the costs.
That's right. Well, good. So with that, I think we are kind of at the end of our little event. We've got a couple of minutes. Cody, I don't know if there are any questions in there. I'm not sure. I've been monitoring a little bit and hit on a couple of things. I don't know if there are any other questions that we may have missed.
So it looks like you've handled most of the questions, but we did just receive one additional comment in the chat box.
All right, let's open up the chat box and see. All right, cost control helps with security's orphan resources. You bet, 100%. So participant 15, I'm not sure exactly who you are, but thank you for that point. Because again, and I'll let a lot of it gets back to, understanding what our resources are, optimizing those resources, making sure not just from a cost standpoint, but those create a tax surface that we want to make sure we're controlling. So great point on that front. Just to wrap up a little bit, we've got a follow-up that'll be hitting your inboxes within the next couple of days. It'll include the top 5 cloud native risk report that we've been referring to from a security standpoint. It will also include the cloud opportunities and challenge short infographic that we put together, and a lot of those graphs that we showed to start off the event. So enjoy those as they may be. And before we wrap up, I would be, I wouldn't be diligent if I didn't talk about our next big conference on the Techstrong side, DevOps Experience, November 16th. You can sign up for it there. It's really about DevOps everywhere. I think we're calling it DevOps to the edge and beyond. So really DevOps is starting to impact in terms of edge-based workloads as well as IoT and a number of those other kind of environments. So we're starting to see DevOps practices and DevOps mindset really start to permeate through those different environments. So come see us, spend the day with us on that front, learn quite a bit about DevOps and the DevOps experience and where things are. And with that, Cody, I'll hand it back off to you to wrap things up.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you as well, Bar, for joining us today. We really appreciate the time and a lot of the effort that goes into putting together these reports, and then, of course, giving us that information over this format. So thank you both so much for your time and dedication.
Thank you.
So I'd like to quickly remind our audience that this session was in fact recorded. So following this program, you should receive an email with a link to access that recording on demand. Or you can find the recording living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and just be sure to look in the on-demand section. So we do still have 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing. Our winners are Joe L., Eric T., Julia W., and Susanna O. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, do check your spam folder. So I'd like to thank Palo Alto Networks for sponsoring today's program. I'd like to thank Techstrong Research for helping with the content of today's program. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. We do just ask for one extra moment of your time to fill out a brief survey that will pop up on your screen as soon as we close out. But otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning program, as well as our DevOps experience happening November 16th. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And Mike, Bar, thank you once again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.